Hi, my name is Jennifer Bartley, and I help people recover from religion. And I think that it's fair we start off with something really basic, which is what is religious harm? What is it that people are healing from if they've been exposed to a harmful aspect of religion? And I have a couple of different categories of harm that may be helpful for you in understanding what it is that was hurtful. Maybe you identify with some of these. As always with definitions, take it with a grain of salt because this is my interpretation and it's always open to edits and critiques. So, the first category of harm that people experience in religion that I've observed is relational harm. This is everything that encompasses like one person has hurt another person in a religious context. And usually this is wrapped up in a power dynamic where one person is claiming religious authority and maybe that's from a religious text or claims that God is speaking to them. But one person is claiming to have authority over another person in the religion, and there's harm happening in that context. So, very familiar version of this is sexual abuse that happens in religions, but it also includes things like spiritual abuse, emotional abuse, financial exploitation, and more things like that. But just imagine anything that happens between two people. This is the relational harms that can happen in religion. And the second area that might be helpful to know about is ideological harm. So, this has to do with belief systems or doctrines that negatively affect how someone sees themselves and the world around them. The two main areas that these ideologies usually focus on if they're causing harm are shame-based teachings and the idea that you are not good, or fear-based teachings that you are not safe. A couple of examples of shame-based teachings, you are not good, things like being taught you are fundamentally sinful, untrustworthy, that you are broken, you can't trust yourself. Purity culture teachings fall under this category because it's still surrounded with the idea that you're not good, there's something wrong with you. Purity culture restricts someone's sexuality or gender expression and shames them, shames bodily autonomy, and gives a very rigid and strict teaching about what sexuality needs to look like, or else you are not good. And the fear-based teachings that you're not safe, those are things like teaching people about Satan, that they might go to hell, that they are at risk of being punished by God. They are also sometimes related to teachings that the world is going to end. Again, the message "you are not safe" gets reinforced over and over and over. One other version of this is isolation teachings. It says that anyone not in our group is dangerous, evil, or inferior, and you should be careful not to associate with them. And so someone is getting restricted into a tiny little box of their religious group. So we've talked about relational harm and ideological harm. A third type of harm is high control group structures. So this is the social dynamics that surround a high control group where a self-containing system gets reinforced and it looks like someone's participating with their own free will, but really, if you unpack what's going on and the dynamic of the teaching and the social expectations, individuals are often losing lots of their autonomy and taking on a group identity that's getting reinforced over and over and over. And you will see in a social setting like this a lot of very controlled expectations on behaviors, on thought expression, on emotional expression, and everything is getting kind of manipulated down into a person being less and less connected to their autonomous self and more putting on these rules and expectations from the group. And sometimes in high control group environments, you also see a very common playbook of recruitment where a target recruit is having a lot of love bombing happen, a lot of high emotion and positive emotion around joining the group. And then once they join, there is a hidden agenda that gets kind of switched on. And once they join and they're committed, then there's a breaking down of their individual self-identity and a really high stake pressure on you have to do this or else something really bad is going to happen, aka like eternal consequences or you're going to be harmed. And so that's how someone gets kind of sucked into a high control group mindset. And that does happen in a religious context quite frequently with high control groups. Okay, and finally, the fourth layer and the last layer I was going to talk about of harm in religions is psychological harm. So far, everything we've talked about is happening externally. The relational harm, ideologies, and the high control group structure all happens outside of a person. But psychological harm is when someone encounters any of these external factors and it shapes the way that they think about themselves and the way that they relate to themselves. So you're oftentimes going to see a lot of high control groups where a person now has a very high inner critic that's self-policing their thoughts and their feelings. Oftentimes there's like the good me and the bad me, and there's a constant inner battle about like what version of a person is allowed to exist. And sometimes this looks like a lot of self-deprecating thoughts, a lot of turning down inner needs, turning down inner intuitions, whether that's doubts or emotions or just wanting to individuate and be different from the group or having questions about the group. The psychological harm, sometimes this is what people are referring to when they're talking about religious trauma, because they're referring to what happened to them as a result of their exposure to religious harm. And it's certainly worth noting that there is significant impact often when people are harmed in religion to their psychology. If you're interested in learning more about this, you can look at my video on religious trauma and hear more about that. But just to keep this brief, that was 4 examples of what religious harm often looks like. And hopefully it resonated with you. If not, just know that these are my definitions and they're certainly open to be edited or changed based on your experience. And wherever you are in the process of healing from religion, I am wishing you well on your journey.